Okay, so welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you for our program, If You Love Neil Gaiman. This program is in celebration of the St. Louis Literary Award. This award is presented by St. Louis University and has honored writers for over 50 years. The award, quote, recognizes a living writer with a substantial body of work that has enriched our literary heritage by deepening our insight into the human condition and by expanding the scope of our compassion, end quote. So recent winners of this award include authors like Zadie Smith, Margaret Atwood, Michael Chabon, and this year's award winner is Neil Gaiman. So we are participating in a community celebration of this award. And we're really excited to have, programs surrounding Neil Gaiman and his work, which is what we're doing tonight. So, and you'll hear about another program that we're running this month at the end of this, this presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about our Zoom environment in case this is new for you. So tonight's program is in a webinar format. So your camera and microphone are not active. No one can see or hear you, even though you can see and hear us. If you are having trouble hearing us, be sure to turn up the volume on your device or leave the program and re-enter. We find that usually helps as well. However, if you do have questions for us, you can enter them in the chat. So it looks like a little speech bubble with the word chat underneath it in your icon bar. Our chat box is open and we will be answering questions during a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. But feel free to put any questions that you have in that chat box as they occur to you, and we'll handle them as we have time at the end. So tonight's presenters are myself. I'm Sarah. I'm from Adult Services. I'm an adult service specialist for Reader's Advisory, which is like matchmaking between books and readers. I am also joined by Harry, who also is an adult services specialist for Reader's Advisory. We also have Name from Thornhill and Kaylin from Prairie Commons, and we're really excited to have the two of them with us. They are also fans of Neil Gaiman, so we're really excited. So we are going to be talking about, each of the four of us is going to talk about our favorite Neil Gaiman work and then some read-alikes that you may like if you like that Neil Gaiman book. If you signed up for this program before, say, 1 o'clock this afternoon, you may have gotten an email from me that has a handout attached to it that you can use to follow along with us. That handout also has clickable covers on the book. So if you click on the cover of the book, it will take you to our catalog where you can request a copy. The books that we're talking about today are available in either print or one of our e-media formats. If you didn't get the handout, no worries. I am going to be sending a follow-up email to this program. We are recording tonight's program. It will be on our YouTube channel. So once that recording is available for you to watch, I will send a follow-up email that also will have the handout attached to it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, my favorite Neil Gaiman book is Neverwhere. And although it was published in 1997, I had read several other of his books. I only discovered this one a few years ago. I immediately fell in love with it, though, because it has like a bunch of elements that I love in books, such as hidden magical worlds, a tone that is by turns humorous and taunting, paired with sort of high stakes, and a main character that is a kind and decent person, but has to find a hidden strength in order to overcome big challenges. And so this has all of that, and I love books like that. So this is the story of Richard Mayhew. He's sort of an average young man who is just beginning to gain success in life and in his career. And he and his beautiful, sort of classy fiance are on their way out to dinner in London. When Richard abandons their date and insists on acting as a good Samaritan to help this injured young woman, and he takes her back to his apartment to recover. He finds, though, that his kindness has a price. This one's name is Dor, D-O-O-R, and Dor's become very important in this novel. And she is from a magical realm called London Below, where people who've fallen through the cracks live. Richard finds out that by helping Dor, he has become one of these people, and he's now invisible to those around him, and he's lost his job and his fiance and his apartment. So after entering London Below to search out for Dor, he finds out that basically his only chance to get his life back is to help Dor in her dangerous quest to escape these assassins that are on her tail and to find out what has happened to her father. If you, like me, fantasize about sort of escaping your mundane life, finding strengths and talents that you never knew you had, and saving a hidden magical realm, then this is the book for you. Okay, so all of my picks tonight have this sort of similar theme of an everyday person who stumbles into or upon a magical world and has to discover things about themselves to overcome these supernatural challenges. So my first pick, The Changeling by Victor Laval. This book centers on a rare book trader and new dad named Apollo, who wants to be a different kind of father from his own. He wants to be sort of a better, more involved, sort of modern dad. He feels that his wife Emma might be struggling postpartum. She has sort of claimed that their son is not really their son, but he is shocked when she commits this serious act of violence against himself and their baby son, and then she disappears. So traditionally, a changeling is a strange fake baby that has been substituted for a real child stolen by fairies. And so, Emma had sort of claimed that their baby wasn't real. And at first, Apollo reacts to this incident with intense rage. But then a sort of series of strange events lead him to reconsider Emma's claims, as well as traditional stories of changelings a bit more deeply. He embarks on this quest to find out what has happened, and it takes him to some hidden magical places in the greater New York area. And the book sort of effectively uses magical realism to tie together modern anxieties around like parenthood and feminism and racism and online activity and online trolls, together with like old magic and fairy tales and monsters and myths. So, much like Gaiman, Laval's attention to detail really allows him to create this dark fantasy world that feels quite believable. So if you are into that sort of dark fantasy and you like these sort of traditional tales that have all of that happen in like a modern world, then definitely check out The Changeling. Okay, my next pick is The Hike by Drew Magary. In this book, the main character, Ben, is on a business trip in rural Pennsylvania. And after checking into his hotel, he decides to take, a quick walk in the nearby woods to sort of clear his head before his meeting. But he gets very, very, very lost. Like one would expect during any sort of mythical odyssey, like Homer's Odyssey. He meets several guides and enemies and fellow travelers along the way, such as a beautiful human-eating giant and a talking crab. He discovers that the only way out is to find this shadowy figure known as the producer. And there's only one rule that Ben has to follow if he's going to make it back out alive, and that is don't stray from the path. This book has kind of a dreamlike quality as Ben stumbles between various scenarios, kind of in that dream logic way that you have. And these different sort of scenes involve references to his own life, to video games, and to myths. But it's also sort of a funny book. Ben often uses dark humor to try and like keep his perspective during the journey. And much like Neverwhere, it really gets you thinking about what you would be willing to do to sacrifice in order to save your own life, and what you would think about that life, though, once you made it out to the other side of your ordeal. This book is both philosophical and absurd, and it's really a fun ride. So if you haven't read this one yet, then definitely check it out. Okay, next up I have Magic for Liars by Sarah Gailey. In Magic for Liars, the main character is named Ivy. She is a private investigator that works on cases in sort of the shadier parts of Oakland, California. And like many PIs in noir fiction, her personal life is something of a mess, and the cases she works on bring her a lot of headaches and danger. But things take sort of a turn for the different when she is summoned to solve a case at the Osthorne Academy for Young Mages. This is the magical boarding high school where her twin sister teaches. The fact that her sister Tabitha had magical abilities and Ivy didn't led to a lot of tension in the family and eventually to an estrangement between the two sisters. But now it's Ivy's very sort of everyday, normal, mundane sleuthing abilities and that are like kind of needed to solve this murder that has happened at the school because they have not been able to use magic to solve it. And, you know, Ivy feels that like at the end of the day, the motivations of a murderer and the clues that they have left behind can be found, you know, regardless of whether the means are magical or not. And along the way, while Ivy is at the school, she has to come to terms with like her relationship with her sister, her relationship to magic, you know, who she really is, the kind of life she wants to lead, and the kind of cases she wants to go to solve moving forward. Like Gaiman, Gailey again includes these very specific details about the more mundane parts of the world of the book, such as music and fashion and high school power hierarchies that lend a believability to like the magical parts of the book. And honestly, both the noir and the magical academy tropes, which have been done over and over in this book, are like really spot on. And the combination of the two is really fresh. I just really love this book. So if you like mysteries or fantasy or both, then definitely check this one out. Okay, then my next book is The Last Bus to Everland by Sophie Cameron. This is a teen novel, and it has a really great opening line, quote, "This would never have happened if I hadn't named the bloody cat Tinkerbell," end quote. In this book, the main character, Brody Fair, is regularly bullied by these neighborhood girls who call him a fairy and like beat him up and, you know, do normal bully sort of things to him. But don't worry though, because the cat does get away and Brody is saved from this sort of opening incident by a beautiful boy named Nico, who is wearing these blue paper mache fairy wings. And after coaxing the cat out from under a nearby car, Nico invites Brody to meet him and some friends the next day at this very specific time, 11:21 p.m. Brody is sort of smitten with Nico. You know, he wishes he could sort of be like him and is also sort of attracted to him. So strange as this whole thing seems, he decides to go and meet him. And it turns out that this specific time and place is when a portal regularly opens to a magical place called Everland, where Nico and his misfit friends, and now Brody, can sort of go and be themselves. But the doors to Everland start closing, and Brody is going to have to make a choice about where he intends to stay and what he intends to do about that. As you probably guessed, this is a book with a twist on Peter Pan, which also happens to be Brody's favorite childhood movie. It's really kind of inventive, though. It's its own thing, and it has a main character in Brody that, much like Richard in Neverwhere, is just a decent, regular guy, regular kid, who has to come to terms with what makes him special and worthy of his own regard. Okay, and my last pick is also a teen novel that has a lot of crossover appeal for adults. It is Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older. And at the beginning of this book, the main character, Sierra, thinks she's just like a regular Puerto Rican teen in Brooklyn who loves to draw and notebooks and like hang out with her friends. And she plans to spend her summer going to parties and painting her first mural, which was commissioned by a friend of her grandpa. Her grandpa was like played checkers, and this is like a friend of his, and he's commissioned her to build or to paint this mural on the side of a half-finished building that like a developer has abandoned. But the mural starts acting like really strange. There are painted tears that appear sometimes when Sierra has just looked away for a minute, and the overall color is fading and things sort of seem to change about the mural. And then other things start happening, sort of strange supernatural things start happening in her life. And it turns out that Sierra's grandfather, who has recently suffered a stroke, is a shadow shaper. This is an artist who can imbue paintings with the power of ancestral spirits. And someone is out to steal that power and to kill shadow shapers one by one. So Sierra convinces her artist friend, and maybe more than a friend, Robbie, to help her get to the bottom of things. And she uncovers some secrets about her family and her own place among the shadow shapers. And so, like Neverwhere explores British class through this idea of London Below, this book explores the need to preserve and carry on Puerto Rican and Haitian heritage, art, and culture in a way that's like enchanting and moving. And there are 2 more books in this series. So if this one draws you in, there are even more, there's even more to enjoy. So those are my picks. And next up we have Harry. So go ahead and take it away, Harry.
Thanks, Sarah. When you presented this assignment to us, I thought, I'm going to try to take this literally. What I did is I took this 2013 book, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and I tried to pick books that I thought were influenced by Gaiman's book. Now, The Ocean at the End of the Lane is from the perspective of a middle-aged man looking back to when he was 7 years old, living in a house at the end of the lane in rural England. Very similar to the way Gaiman grew up. In fact, I have an interview with him from CBR.com, which is Comic Book Resources, and he says, it's absolutely not autobiographical. It's filled with lies and stuff that I made up, and the family is not my family. But the kid is pretty much me-ish. And there's another quote, the lane I did live on, I was convinced that I lived in a semi-mythological place. So if you read this book, which was published in 2013, picked as the book of the year in the British National Book Awards, overwhelmingly picked by the public, Gaiman wrote this book in a coffee shop for his then wife, now his ex-wife, and she hated fantasy books. So he based a lot of the events in the book on his real life, like the theft of a car that happened to his father. And Gaiman's perspective is that when he heard about the theft of the car when he was a kid, he was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I missed that. That was so exciting. So the themes of this book are good versus evil, what it is to be a child, loss of innocence. And those themes, I think you will see carry through in the other books that I'm going to talk about. My next book is probably my densest book of the group. If you read fantasy books, a term that you see discussed is world building. So this book, The Bone Clocks, has 6 first-person parts. We span the years 1984 to 2048. So you can imagine this book ends on a dystopian note. But at the beginning, we have 15-year-old Holly Sykes, who gets into an argument with her mother regarding Holly's boyfriend and storms out of the house. Now, Holly has been hearing the radio people. In other words, she hears voices, people communicating with her. And this is a fantasy book. We have good versus evil, the innocence of children. We also have a group called the horologists battling the anchorites. And you will need a dictionary to look up some of the vocabulary words in this book. It is an interesting book. I would recommend it if you're a sophisticated fantasy reader. You want a long, densely plotted book that covers a span of years and covers different types of situations from ordinary life to dystopian life in Iceland at the end of the book. My next book is The Buried Giant. Now this one, you have to say, Harry, you picked a good book because Neil Gaiman reviewed this book in the New York Times book review and liked it. This one is set in post-King Arthur Britain. We have ogres and knights and an elderly couple who is traveling to see their long-lost son in a land shrouded by mist, and they're traveling with a she-dragon. The themes in this book are memory, the loss of memory, the disappearance of loved ones. The entire population in this book has memory problems. At the end of the book, do they find their son or not? I'm not going to spoil it for you, but this is a beautifully written book, and I think Gaiman would agree with me on that. My next book is Himself by Jess Kidd. This book starts with the father of a child murdering the child's mother. Neil Gaiman doesn't shy away from violence, so that's why I thought this one would fit in. And the child grows up. Well, the child is protected by trees and ferns from being murdered. So when the father has finished with murdering the mother, he turns to murder the child, and the child is gone because the child has been covered up by trees and ferns. So the child grows up after being adopted and returns to the village in Ireland where he was born, seeking the truth. Along the way, he meets the ghost of a dead girl and others, including a dead collie dog. These ghosts communicate with him. I don't want to spoil the ending, but you can imagine this is another setup of good versus evil, and there's going to be a big confrontation at the end. The themes are love and loss, grief, secrets, memory, and it is a beautifully written book. So if you like beautiful writing, I would recommend Himself by Jess Kidd. My next book is Among Others by Joe Walton. This book is set in Wales. The main character, Morwenna, is a female teenager who is attending a boarding school. It's set in 1979 to 1980. But since this is like a Neil Gaiman book, we have fairies, magical realism, and of course, at the end, a tribute to libraries, which I liked. We have coming of age themes and good versus evil. Morwenna and her twin sister battle their evil mother who puts a spell on them. The twin sister dies, but what about Morwenna? Does she survive? Is there a battle with her mother at the end? And what about those book pages that turn into flaming spears? This one you have to read. Again, beautifully written, interesting book. My next book is The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. Now, this is a young adult book, which adults could appreciate also. 17-year-old Alice and her mother have lived their life on the road. Alice's grandmother has written a series of dark fairy tale books set in a place called the Hinterland. What do you think happens? Someone from the Hinterland, which is supposed to be an imaginary place, appears in our book and abducts Alice's mother. So Alice has to travel to the Hazel Wood, that's the title of the book, to find out the truth. So we have coming of age, dark fantasy, and suspense. Also, this is also a very enjoyable book. Now, except for the first book, which I mentioned, all of these books are pretty much linear in their format. So you can read them from beginning to end without worrying about time shifts or changes of narrators or a complex plot. So on the other hand, if you like a lot of world building and a complicated plot, then I would recommend the first book. Now, if you're interested in more fantasy books, Sarah will invite you at the end to submit a personalized reading list request to us. In my case, since I couldn't do that and ask Sarah to do a list for me, maybe I could have if I'd given a phony name. I went to the novelist database, which you also have access to, and I also went to the Reddit thread for R Fantasy, and there were a lot of threads about Neil Gaiman, and I sifted through many, many books to find these. I'm going to pass next over to Kaylin.
Hi, my name's Kaylin.
Oh,
I actually think these are.
Yeah, I think it's next is Name.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, orders happen. Hello, everybody. My name is Nami, and I'm going to be talking about The Sandman by Neil Gaiman and books like that. Sandman, that is a title. It's a graphic novel collected into 10 volumes, and I think a lot of people have heard of this. Even if you haven't read it, you've probably heard of it. It was recently a pretty popular Netflix series, not even a year ago, and it is kind of the opposite of our last list. It has a lot of shifting perspectives and years, and it's really a little intimidating when you first come into it. But at the heart of Sandman, you have the kind of the god of dreams. You have Morbius, excuse me, and it is a really contemplative piece of work where it kind of it like explores humanity, what it is that people do in their darkest moments and in their best moments, and it's a good time. There's a lot of big ideas in this book. So I'm going to show you a few other books that have similar themes. I'd say the overarching theme from all of these is there's a bigger picture than the regular civilians in these titles are aware of. Okay, so the first book that I'm picking is another graphic novel. I had a mix of graphic novels and regular novels. It's called Fables, and it is written by Bill Willingham with a few different artists. And it's kind of a more pedestrian look. This one does pretty straightforward linear book. It doesn't jump around the time as much. The concept is it's kind of a fantasy noir, right? There's a mystery at play, and all of the old fairy tales that you can see here on the cover and way more are living in kind of our modern day, and they've been exiled from their original home. They call it the homeland, whether it's like overseas or maybe another dimension. That's kind of, as you learn about the story. But the first book here, the first volume of a few of them, focuses on the mystery. It's a murder mystery, a whodunit on who killed Snow White's sister Rose. So your lead character is the big bad wolf. He's kind of on the right there, and he's kind of taken this human form, and he and Snow White kind of explore this modern fairy tale landscape and have different suspects that they discover and all that. So it's a pretty good book, and it's a self-contained story before you move on to the second volume. The art style is really gorgeous. If you're familiar with the art in Sandman, it reads pretty similar. There's really close shots, but when they come out into those wide shots that shows you all of the different things going on, it's pretty impressive. So yeah. My next book is called the 10,000 Doors, 10,000 Doors of January by Alex Harrow. And it's a novel. It's not a graphic novel. It's more of a fantasy historical fiction, and it takes place in the early 1900s. It's about a young girl named January. That's where January comes from. And she is living with a rich man after her father has to leave. Her and her father were pretty close, but because of the circumstances that they live in, they're separated. And so she's coming into this rich life, and here's the fantasy element. She finds a door, right? And you would think, oh, this is going to be like a Narnia situation, a magical land. And when she first enters this magical door, it is not a land at all, but something else, something otherworldly, not a different world, but another nebulous world. And it kind of captivates her. And that's kind of the platform that launches this story forward. It is, I I would say, a really well-written book. The narrator chews on metaphors and language. She focuses on like what even the letters imply in words, and it's a pretty neat exploration of language and then what that does for her and what it does for the reader. Okay, our next book is called The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a title that I've bumped into a few times, and for good reason. It's a fantasy romance with a touch of historical fiction. It's about two rival illusionists that are in this circus, and they eventually fall in love with each other, despite the disapproval of the people that would call themselves their masters. The text is grand and mysterious, and there's always something teasing the reader, like, you don't know this detail yet. Oh, here's something, but it is beyond us right now. I enjoy the way it occasionally plays with the second person, particularly in the introduction. It kind of introduces you into the world of this mysterious circus. It is, the night circus itself is its own mystery, because the concept is like, it appears out of thin air. It's really, really takes you by surprise. So I hope you like that book. Next is maybe my favorite pick here. This is called Piranesi. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but it's by SUSANNA CLARKE. Maybe the shortest book on this list. It's not very long at all, but it is really captivating once you go into it. It is a fantasy, maybe a fantasy sci-fi, a fantasy dystopia. It's about Piranesi, and he lives in a world which is a giant house. It's like bigger than anybody could ever imagine. Some hallways will just occasionally flood. There are hallways with giant statues all around. There's animals that free roam. And the only other person that Piranesi knows and is a neighbor to is something called the other. It's not a man. It's not a human. It's something else. And he knows more than Piranesi. And there's some really chilling exchanges between them because, Piranesi is a human. Where's everybody else? What has happened? And that kind of unfurls across the book. The novel is told through journal entries. And the journal entries really do a lot in the world building. But the world building, I love this. It does more storytelling than a lot of other world building I've seen. There's little details in the way that Piranesi narrates. Because what I like about him, about the character, is that he is scientific. He likes to observe things and to make hypotheses, but he's also very earnest and he's very passionate about learning. So it's a really infectious read. And yeah, as I said, there's a ton of story just within the world building itself. So I really recommend this one. This is probably my favorite on the list. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about another graphic novel because I think that, is deserving of the medium for Sandman. And this one is called The Wicked and the Divine. It's by Gillian McKelvey and Wilson Cowles. There's a group of gods that appear every 90 years. It's not 100 years, it's 90 years. And they get to live on Earth for 2. So once they appear, they get reincarnated into these 20-something-year-old bodies. And they've got about 2 years to do what they will. They have different abilities and powers, and they love to be celebrities. And so they have appeared in the year, I think, 2014, and they are effectively pop stars with fans. And that's kind of like a modern day, like, praising of gods. It's an interesting commentary. One of them, this is the twist in the book. Her name is Lucy, or Lucifer. That's where she comes from. She gets into a kerfuffle with some assassins, and the assassins don't make it. So she gets taken to court. And while she's kind of playing around and teasing, the judge is murdered, and everybody assumes that this god does it. There's a super fan that is kind of our lens through the story, and her name is Laura. And Laura decides that she's going to put it on herself to solve this mystery, to solve this framing of, you know, who did this, and it must be another god. So as she goes and talks to all of these other super famous, powerful beings, she learns a little more than she bargains for. So this is the first volume of The Wicked and the Divine. So those are my picks. I hope that you are able to check those out. We're going to let Kaylin finally take her turn now. Thank you.
Hi, guys. I'm Kaylin, and my favorite Neil Gaiman book is The Sleeper and the Spindle. The Sleeper and the Spindle is a young adult novel. Again, one that I really think adults would enjoy as well. And you'll see kind of a trending theme among my picks. They all happen to be young adult novels that I think would go great for teens, young adults, or adults in general. The Sleeper and the Spindle is a beautiful novel. It's actually illustrated throughout, and it's illustrated by Chris Riddell. Beautiful illustrations, and it is a fairy tale retelling. It's sort of a retelling of Sleeping Beauty and Snow White mixed together. It tells the tale of a queen who, on the eve of her wedding, sets out to rescue a princess from a sleeping enchantment. So we get that Snow White sort of element from the queen that's going out and doing the rescuing, and she brings along all of these magical little dwarves. That sounds kind of familiar. And she's going to rescue this princess who is sort of like Sleeping Beauty, who's been put under a sleeping curse. Little does she know that this sleeping princess she is going to rescue is going to be completely not what you would expect from a princess. And so the two of them kind of have a really great meeting and an interesting adventure along the way. This Neil Gaiman book, although it is directly a fairy tale retelling, it's similar to a lot of Neil Gaiman books in the sense that it is written very fairy tale-esque. And I even heard my co-hosts here talking about other fairy tale retellings for their suggestions as well, because I think it really just fits with the tone of Neil Gaiman's writing. So all of my picks kind of follow that theme. They're all young adult novels, and they are all fairy tale retellings. And they all have elements of fantasy, because again, Neil Gaiman writes a lot of fantasy novels. So yeah. My first pick is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. Cinder is the first in a, I believe, 5-book series called The Lunar Chronicles. This series is a series about all of your favorite fairy tale characters. So we've got, in this first one, Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood comes in, all different kinds of fairy tale characters. But in this story, although it is set in what was once Earth, it is sort of this dystopian world, this dystopian version of Earth, where there's cyborgs and androids and a plague. And the rulers of this world are very cruel. And our main character, Cinder, is one of many who is oppressed by the queen, the evil queen, if you will, named Queen Lavanna. And she, throughout the series, bands with some of our other beloved fairy tale characters, and together they are going to take on the rulers and try and win their kingdom back, in a sense. My next pick is BRIAR by Mercedes Lackey. This is also a Sleeping Beauty retelling, and it is heavy fantasy. Your classic, someone learns that they have powers, and then goes on this training arc to kind of learn how to use those powers and then use them for good or for a purpose. This retelling follows Aurora's older sister. Aurora's older sister's name in this book is Miriam. And on the day that her little sister Aurora is christened, the christening is interrupted by this dark fae. And this dark fae has come to curse Aurora. And during this sort of interaction, this conflict, Miriam discovers she has powers. And so she must journey to this school to learn about these great powers that she all of a sudden has, or learns she has. And she's going to learn to use this magic to protect herself and her sister from these dark fae and these kind of other forces that are what you slowly uncover and discover as you read through the book. My next pick is The Bone Spindle by Leslie Vedder. This book is a great pick for anyone who considers himself a bookworm. The main character, Fi, is a bookworm through and through. She's also a treasure hunter, though. And this is also loosely a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but it also pulls elements from other classic fairy tales. In this retelling, we follow two best friends named Fi and Shane, who are both treasure hunters, but they don't believe in fairy tales. Although Fi reads a lot of fairy tales, she doesn't believe that they could possibly be real. Until one day, while the pair are out treasure hunting, Fi accidentally pricks her finger on a bone spindle. And when she does that, she gets stuck with the spirit of Briar Rose. And Briar Rose in this story is a prince under a sleeping curse. So we've got sort of a gender role reversal on the classic Sleeping Beauty story. Together, Fi and Shane must work alongside Briar Rose to break Briar Rose's curse, which they learn was placed upon him over 100 years ago. And they also have to work to sort of get the kingdom back and fight, again, kind of a greater force that they uncover throughout the story. My next pick is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. This one is one you may have heard of. It definitely has made the rounds recently. It is the first in a trilogy. I'd call it a fantasy romance trilogy, and it was very popular recently on TikTok and other social media. This one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It follows Prince Ren, who was cursed by an enchantress to repeat his 18th year. So he has been living as an 18-year-old on repeat for years and years and years. And slowly it sort of drives him mad, and he becomes this beast, in a sense, that sort of destroys the people around him. So over time, he becomes kind of hopeless that this curse will ever be broken, and sort of gives up and gives into that beast. And then one day, he meets this girl. Her name is Harper. She is from the United States, from Washington, and she was pulled from Washington on accident during this like freak event, this by chance happening. She is pulled into this world that Prince Ren is living in, and when she enters his life, Ren decides that this is the girl that's going to awaken his curse that he thought would never be broken. So they're going to work together to break this curse and, again, sort of save the kingdom, as is a popular theme throughout these books, because it's such a popular theme in fairy tales. So we see that throughout all of these fairy tale retellings. And of course, along the way, she sort of develops feelings for Ren, and we get to see elements of their romance together. My last pick is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This is a Arabian Nights retelling. It follows Shahrzad, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. She has a dear friend who is taken as a bride, essentially, and killed by Khalid, who is this like ancient being who continually takes wives, and unfortunately they don't usually have the best fate. They usually all end up dead. And such is what happens to our main character's very close friend. So when our main character finds this out, she vows revenge and decides that she will become Khalid's next bride, and she will sort of work her way into his life that way and enact her revenge. Unfortunately, unfortunately or fortunately, along the way, she starts to develop feelings, surprisingly, for Khalid. And through this book, we sort of see her navigating her warring feelings between this love she develops for him and her need for revenge. And yeah, it's a wonderful book, very, very beautifully written. Probably my favorite of my picks tonight. And those are my picks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kaylin.
Thank you so much, Kaylin.
Okay, so all right, so you heard a ton of different recommendations tonight, but if you did want more, we invite you to try out our personalized reading service that Harry was talking about earlier in the presentation. This is a form on our website that you can fill out and tell us the kinds of books that you like and don't like and are in the mood for, and we will create a list of 5 titles just for you. You can find this under the Books, E-Media, More tab on our website. And then I just want to bring up, like I said, this is in celebration of the St. Louis Literary Award. And so we do have some other things going on related to this. So one thing that we have going on is the Inspired by Neil Gaiman program. This is where you can submit your fan art or your fan stories inspired by Neil Gaiman. And we're going to make an online compilation of them. This is the link, but I will also put the link that you can actually click on in our follow-up email. So yeah, if you have any kind of art or stories that are inspired by the work of Neil Gaiman, we invite you to submit them to this collection. It's going to be really fun. It's open all the way through the end of the month, so you do have a little bit more time to submit your work. And then I also want to say that the actual award ceremony, the St. Louis Literary Award Ceremony, is happening on Thursday, April 13th at the Sheldon Concert Hall. And at that ceremony, John Hamm will be interviewing Neil Gaiman. So that's pretty cool. And then the day after, Neil Gaiman will be presenting a free author talk at St. Louis University on Friday, April 14th. And you can find out about both of those events on the St. Louis University website. And then we do have a few upcoming adult programs here at the library that you might be interested in. Next month, we have a virtual program called Spring Into Reading. At that program, I'm going to be talking about some tips for breaking out of your reader's block or your reader's sort of rut, some ways that you can find new books to read using library resources. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of under the radar titles that you might not have heard of. And then later in April, we are having our Lit Lovers Festival. This used to be in person in the before times. It has been virtual the last 3 years, but we are back in person at the Thornhill branch. It's going to be an after hours event on Friday, April 28th. There'll be a little reception at the beginning where you can find out about different things at the library of interest to readers. There'll be some refreshments and a craft and that kind of thing. And then there'll be a presentation from 7 to 8 where myself and Harry and our selectors who select all of the adult material at the library, we'll be talking about some upcoming books that are coming out later in the year. So we hope that you will join us at Thornhill for that. You can find about these and more events on our online events calendar. And then, yeah, let's have some questions. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite all of our presenters to turn their cameras back on, and we'll see if we have any questions. see here.
I don't see any questions, Sarah. I see favorable comments about the presentation.
Oh, thanks.
But I have a question. I
Sure.
revealed how I came up with my picks, but no one else did. So I want to hear, how did you pick your books? Were these just off the top of your head when you picked your first title? You knew that you were going to have the other picks?
So for me personally, I did think about myself, like, what about Neverwhere did I really like? And this is like a theme that I read a lot about. So several of these books I just had already read, and they did come to like my mind. And then I did use the novelist database for a couple of them to sort of fill it out to find some books. And I did sort of a theme search which you can do in novelists. Actually, I might talk about that and spring into reading. I think I use the theme like Hidden World or something like that. There's a theme that reminded me of a couple of other books that I could add to my list. But yeah, several of these are like long-standing favorites of mine. So they just sort of popped into my head when I thought of Neverwhere.
Mine was fairly easy to pick because it was directly a fairy tale retelling. And I have always been obsessed for some reason with fairy tale retellings. I love picking out the comparisons and seeing what's similar and what's changed and all these ways that people reinterpret them. So I sort of just went through my list in my head of some of my favorite fairy tale retellings. And then I sort of narrowed it down to young adult retellings because I knew that this Neil Gaiman pick was young adult. So I thought we would go that route. And that's sort of how I went about picking mine.
Yeah, I am primarily a kids librarian. So this gave me a real opportunity to like kind of go outside my wheelhouse a little bit. So there were some of these graphic novels have been on my list for a little while to get to. And so I was able to explore those. And then the other titles was honestly, it was just kind of poking around and getting feelers like the Reddit page that was mentioned, seeing what's out there. And I'm happy to report back my notes today.
Nami, you picked two of my favorite fantasy authors, Alex Harrow and Aaron Morgenstern.
Yeah, Aaron Morgenstern. There's a lot more to see from them.
He's great. They're great.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out for one of Harry's picks among others. If you are a fantasy fan, this is a great book to read because it references like 100 other fantasy and sci-fi novels. The main character is a really big reader, and then like as Harry says, she's a library patron, and she is part of a fantasy and sci-fi book discussion group in the book. So it talks a lot about sort of the magic of libraries in that way too. So yeah, among others, if you're a sci-fi and library fan, definitely try that one. I do want to note that one of our attendees has put in the chat that there are still virtual seats available for the literary award ceremony, as well as seats for Neil Gaiman's author craft talk that'll happen on SLU's campus. So like I said, do go to St. Louis University's website to find out about those two events.
We do have a question. So one viewer said American Gods is their favorite Neil Gaiman book. What do we think?
I'll be super honest and say that is one that I actually haven't read, even though I know there's like a TV series of it. So I've kind of thought like, oh, maybe I should read it so I can watch the TV series. But I've read well, Neil Gaiman's really prolific, which is probably one of the reasons that he won this award. So I've read a lot of Neil Gaiman's works, but that actually is one that I haven't read. So and I know it's famous. I mean a lot of people really like that one. It's a lot of people like it. Yeah, one of our attendees in the chat says that it's excellent. So guess I'll have to try it. Yeah.
I see several
I've
people
also not read
recommending it.
Man, we need to read this one.
Yeah.
I've got my read-alike brain on. I'm not familiar with it either, but I know my dad has read it.
Neil Gaiman really lends himself to presentation in a graphic format, like a graphical novel.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, because he is such a big idea guy. Like that is one of the phrases that you could really attach. And so to have illustrations come in and really lend itself to that. One of the most famous younger books that he has written is Coraline, and a lot of people really connect with that movie because you get to tie that visual element to these big ideas. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, one of our attendees has put in the chat that they like trigger warnings. I like that book a lot too. It's mostly a collection of short stories, but it does contain a couple of poems too. So if you're not like in the mood to just like sit down and read a whole novel, that's definitely a good one to try out. Similarly, I like it, I think it's called Instructions, which is sort of a like, it's almost like I almost thought about picking Instructions because it's part of this genre that I call like children's books for all ages, or picture books for all ages, I guess, you know. So it has this feeling of like a children's picture book, but I think it's actually a little bit better for teens and adults. And it talks about sort of all the rules that you have to follow while you're in a fairy tale. So that's also sort of a shorter one. So if you're looking for something shorter to try, that one, and trigger warnings is good. Yeah, let's see. Any other questions in the chat before we head out?
Sarah, we should tell people that when we do the personalized reading list, no chatbots are involved.
Yeah, that's right. Personalized reading lists really are done by Harry and I. So so when you fill out the form, it goes to the two of us, and we do put a lot of thought into them and try to find you things that fit just the right thing for you. So sometimes we do get responses like that people are like, oh, I didn't know it was going to come from a real person. It's a real person. And Harry, I will do a personalized reading list for you if you really want.
I would have just invented a name, Sarah, so you wouldn't have known.
I think I would, because I know what you like. So yeah. Let's see. Yeah, anything Kaylin or Name that you have going on at your branches that you want to talk about before we head out? Anything coming up?
Nothing much going on adult wise. We've got a whole lot of kids programs coming up at the Prairie Commons branch, but that's about all we've got going on right now.
I mean, you already plugged our lit festival that's coming up at the Thornhill branch. But right now, what's occupying my brain space is the summer reading club is coming back around. So in a few short months, it'll be here, and we've got, you know, not just at Thornhill, but all around. There's going to be adult programming, and obviously adults can participate in the reading club too. So keep an eye out for that, and maybe stockpile these suggestions so you can stock up your minutes.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but we basically start planning the next year's summer reading club like almost as soon as it ends this year. So yes, we are in like high planning mode right now, with like thinking about programs and prizes and all sorts of stuff. So it may be kind of cold and rainy out there today, but summer is coming, and so is summer reading club. So we're excited for that. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I think we will end it there. So I want to say a special thank you to Kaylin and Name for joining us tonight, taking time out of your normal branch activities to present with us. We really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks to Harry as always. And yeah, thank you to all of you for coming out and joining us and celebrating Neil Gaiman, pretty cool author and the winner of this year's St. Louis Literary Award. So everyone have a lovely evening, and we hope to see you soon at another virtual program. Good night, everyone.